what's wrong with wanting to be perfect? Wanting to be perfect's not the problem. It's someone who is so into perfectionism that they're not willing to be humble, because no one hits 1,000%.
Oh, maybe I do.
We can coach about that later. Hey, welcome to the Consultant and the Coach podcast. I'm here with my good buddy, Josh. How are you, my friend?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing amazing. And today there are 5 things that will actually destroy someone's team. And we're going to warn our listeners about that because we would hate to see people do that.
Yeah. No, definitely. There's lots of things that can derail you from your past and the past of your team. So we're going to get into that dysfunction, how to recognize it, and we won't get into how to fix it yet. But that's
the next episode.
Maybe these will be funny stories
about.
We
need to know, hey, what's going to happen?
What are you looking for?
And so 5 dysfunctional things that can absolutely destroy your team over time. I have a Bible verse. Did you have a Bible verse?
Excellent. Go for it. I was just looking one up. Go.
So, the one I had was 1 Corinthians 13, 11, and 12. Mm-hmm. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child.
There you go.
When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. And what I like about that verse is it's just basically saying, hey, dude, we're adults. We should act like adults. Mm-hmm. We should not be acting like kids. And Paul's saying that to the church in Corinth, saying, hey, dude, you guys should not be acting like kids, because he's talking to adults. And sometimes in business, we have adults.
Yep.
And they act like kids. So what do we do?
Yeah, and they're stuck, right? They're stuck developmentally for lots of reasons as sort of science is caught up to Scripture, right? And understanding these are things that are kind of truths of the Bible that sort of, I guess, we add nuance and language around them from a scientific discovery perspective. But these aren't surprising, right, when you see.
And what we're running into. So there are 5 dysfunctional traits that will absolutely destroy our team. But from the onset, these 5 traits actually look like positive traits until you really sometimes look like positive traits until you look at them a little off. And sometimes we can say, hey, I have this, or this is what I do, and it's actually really blessed my business until it doesn't scale. So that's why these are absolutely imperative. And the first concept is that of superiority, whether it's ourselves or our team members underneath us. If we believe we are superior to others, it over time will take our business down. Now, if we think we're superior to others, what are some good things about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, first of all, one foundational thing I would say to all of this is 2 things. These topics are all on a scale, right? So to some degree, there is an aspect of confidence in the better than, feeling superior, that's probably important to success. So it's not all bad.
No,
right?
It's not.
It's also, then the second thing is, as you begin to see these things in yourself or your leaders, I think the one caution I always give to folks is don't try to take the leap of diagnosing and understanding what led to it. Right? Don't unless you have a relationship with that person that you can truly get into sort of the details of how they grew up and what they've been through, and that takes a long, long time of a deep, deep relationship. Don't try to, diagnose, you were, not held enough as a child, right? I mean, don't judge, right? Don't judge.
We're not going back, but we're talking like, hey, we have either us as leaders, business owners, or employees that we have.
Yep.
If we think we are better than others across the board, we're like even. I mean, we're like, okay, everyone's even, but literally, based on actions, we're like, no, I'm better than so and so.
Yeah.
Over the course of time, that is not healthy, and which is different than gifts, because we already talked about strengths finders and gifts. That's saying, hey, everyone's equal, but we have different gifts and talents. That's very biblical.
Right.
What I'm saying is some people say, yeah, we have different talents, but I'm still better than.
Yeah, well, and I think it's part of this is being able to have the maturity, which is part of what we're talking about, is where maturity is lacking because of some, what is it, adolescent...
Adapted adolescence.
Adapted
is
adolescence,
the psych
right?
term.
Yeah.
We're not going to get into psych
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah.
But if you were to talk to a psych, they'd say, hey, this is adapted adolescence.
But what we're talking about, right, is if I can move 100 widgets and you can move 90 widgets, then yes, I am better at moving the widgets than you are, which is different than a feeling of superiority in terms of my identity as a human, or in our case, we would talk about a child of God and saying, I am better than you in terms of my identity and my place amongst humanity, right, in theology, right? That's the difference, I think, in terms of how we would define that, right? There's certain people who are better at particular tasks. But I would say as a leader, if you want to scale your business, even if you are able to move 100 widgets an hour, but one person's only able to do 90, you need to be able to hire and manage 3 who can do 90 because you can't possibly do 270.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I think a lot of it is just saying, when I say superiority, we just need to understand we are all equal as humans, now there are different levels. I'm not talking about a utopia, but hey, we need to understand, hey, we are all equal under God.
Yep.
Now, I'm not saying not equal pay, not equal thing, but just understanding, because there can be a sense of superiority. I'm better than. We all bring different things to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think it's learning to respect that. And if we're finding ourselves or our other leaders who are struggling with this sense of superiority, we need to. That's the first thing we're talking about.
We need to be aware of
recognize
the 5
it,
dysfunctional traits,
and be aware of it. Like, this is trait number 1. And this will flow. A lot of the stuff we're talking about will flow through to the others, but be aware of it, flag it. We're not solving it today, but this is a major problem for your business if this is happening amongst you or your C-suite.
And and there's a way of saying, and I'm not saying, hey, sometimes we start businesses because we do realize we have a superior idea. I am talking on a human level,
right?
People to people.
Yep.
So superiority is first. Number 2 is believing that we are invulnerable. Or, what someone might say is building up too high of a wall, saying, I'm not going to let you into my life. I'm not going to let this team member into my life. Just building these gigantic walls. And do I really know Josh? Or do I really know this employee? Or you can't build such high walls where we are not known as business owners, as fellow employees and team members. You've got to have that.
And talk out that a little bit more from a leader's perspective. What's the impact to your business when that happens? I mean, I can guess, but I want to hear what you have to say. So it's kind of interesting because we get into the solution, but from the impact to the business is we need to understand, because we're all human, that we come in with our own bias, we come in with our own family. So, for example, leading a business, I'm also a husband. I'm also a dad of 4. I also have a dog. I also am very active in our community. All those things come into play. But I've run into some people, I'm like, I don't even know what your hobby is. Right.
Now, I don't want to go so far over here because now we're going to get into the solution. Some people have no walls whatsoever. I don't need to know coming into work about the argument you had with your spouse or this, or unless it's pertinent to things.
Right.
And so it's figuring out, some people are too invulnerable and they're like, I'm not going to let you know anything.
Yeah. Well, and so where I thought you were going to go with that, where my mind goes in cultures I've been in and those I've studied, is there's significant implications not only for the team that person is on or they're leading, but if you have enough of that in an organization, you actually have a major cultural problem because then you have a truth problem, and if you have a truth problem, you're going to get run over by your competitor, right? This is the Kodak problem. This is the Blockbuster problem. This is the pick a company that's been disrupted. Is they viewed themselves culturally as invulnerable, right? Which is probably made up of a lot of individuals who view themselves as invulnerable.
Absolutely.
Making a leap here a little bit, but I don't think it's too far of a leap. And therefore, that's the danger here, is rolling that up into a cultural context for a company is very dangerous to its long-term health.
And you make a connection here. ID&S, right? That's what we had did I say that right?
DE&I.
DE&I. But going back to that podcast.
Yes, DE&I. Go check it out.
It came back to the whole truth concept.
Exactly.
It's all about truth, and we've got to be able to talk about things, or saying, hey, I disagree with this, or hey, I agree with this, because we are pro-truth, pro-reality. And where we're at is, hey, if companies have too many walls that are too high, that are impenetrable, eventually we have a truth problem. Why aren't our numbers better? Well, we can't talk about that.
Yeah.
And sometimes for business, it's easy to talk about someone's numbers might be down because of a learning thing, but sometimes life issues come into play as well too. I need to know if someone's having health problems. I don't need to necessarily know their health problems, but if they can't come to work on a consistent basis, it's going to drop their numbers. I don't want to fire someone because their spouse has cancer and they're
But you didn't know, right? Yeah.
And I didn't know.
Right.
I had someone a number of years ago. I literally, their performance was horrible. They went from all-star to underperforming for like 3 straight months. This person did not tell me a thing. And eventually we fired them because they just couldn't even do it. They no called, no showed. Well, it wasn't until several months later I then found out, major relationship problems to the point of, just danger, and that was going on. But because the person shared nothing with us, they lost their job, and I felt horrible. But then I was like, they never told us anything. They didn't have to tell me, hey, I'm having this specific relationship problem. But they should have said, hey, something's up in my personal life. It's going to affect my business life. Can you give me some grace? I'd love to. But you can't have your walls so high, because sometimes there's got to be give and take.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to get too much into the solutioning we're going to do in a couple episodes, but I think one of the things that I always encourage companies and leaders I work with is to really not to shy away from the concept of family system theory.
Oh, yeah.
Right, and this kind of interconnectedness of both how we grew up over time as well as the parts of our lives. And so don't shy away from to recognize those impacts and realities. It just, even if, and I would say as a leader, if you say, well, I'm really good at putting up the walls. Well, there you go. Ding, ding, ding. That should be your first problem. That you may be setting a bad example because that's invulnerable. So don't get too don't shy away.
Now, having too big of walls can also lead into the next problem, which is being too good or perfectionistic.
Absolutely.
And that's a huge problem. Someone like, well, what's wrong with wanting to be perfect? Wanting to be perfect's not the problem. Right. It's someone who is so into perfectionism that they're not willing to be humble, because no one hits 1,000%.
Oh, maybe I do. No?
We can coach about that later. But even think of baseball. If you bat .333, which is only getting a hit 1 out of 3
even
times,
just 300, 3 out of 10.
You are an all-star.
Yeah.
And so this is why I love baseball. I mean, it's because, like, what does that tell us? If 1 out of 3 at-bats, you're an all-star, maybe even a Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
I love the illustration there.
Yeah.
But if we can be too perfect, it doesn't allow us to, the humility is like, maybe I can improve that idea.
Well, and I'll tell you a good example of that. I worked, and I think I've mentioned this story probably a time or two because it sticks with me in my professional career, but I worked in an organization that had a lot of dysfunction around that particular topic. So the CEO, who again I will not try to diagnose, but clearly had this problem around perfectionism. He justified it, maybe not for bad reasons, that if there was absolutely no question about the little details, no one would ever question the big details, right? And some of that, I think, stemmed from a perfectionism that was unhealthy, because what I saw was several executives who were so busy literally trying to make sure that the bullets and the bullet sizes and the fonts and the font sizes that were nested appropriately at multiple levels within a particular PowerPoint deck had to be absolutely, they spent so much time doing that to meet this unrealistic perfectionism that they lost a perspective on how to actually make any difference in the content. Absolutely. So that because their mind share was completely taken up with, well, wait a second, this is the third bullet down, and therefore it needs to be an arrow. If it's an arrow, it needs to be 14 font in italics of Times New Roman, and I'm making this up now because I don't even remember, but it literally was very specific, extremely, excruciatingly specific. And I saw a number of executives who were higher than me in the organization. So I was a junior. I was fresh out of grad school. They had zero capacity to actually provide, like, oh, well, the words in that bullet might actually be able to be improved or don't make any sense. Maybe we should actually, like, and they wouldn't change that. They would leave that even though the message was messed up, right? So it's interesting, right?
And so
it creates problems.
The dysfunctional trait that will take out our team is if someone is being too good at the sake of losing the overarching message.
Right.
So I think of either my favorite TED Talk or my favorite business concept that I've learned. What do I remember? I remember the story behind it. I remember the main points. I could not tell you the PowerPoint. I could not tell you the font size. I could not. Now, there is an attention to detail.
There's an attention to detail that's important. And absolutely.
You have to have that to the point that it doesn't take out.
Doesn't distract.
If you remember your biggest things that you have learned from, you're remembering the story behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So if anything, the enemy of being too good, what I've seen is sometimes people don't get anything done because it's not perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Get it out the door at 80%, 70, 60%, or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But if we are focused on perfectionism, which also leads back into not being humble.
Right.
And so now we have things that will destroy team superiority, being too invulnerable, being too good. And then there's the team member, the business owner, the leader that is needless. So this would be someone who is anti-dependent. I'm not going to be dependent on anyone because someone might hurt our business or something might happen. Now, why is that a problem that we need to be aware of?
Well, I think, I'll share a personal story on that one. I think that's one certainly that hits home for me as a leader because, I grew up, without getting into tons of my background, in this case, because this is not my session for therapy, but, my background, especially during, teenage years and sort of the 7 to 17 range we're talking about, were several things that happened where I probably had particular developmental needs that were not met, emotional needs that were not met. And so I learned pretty early on that needing nothing from no one was a really easy way to protect myself, right? And I still struggle with that. Absolutely, because obviously as an independent consultant, it is all me,
it is
right?
You.
And it's a problem because it certainly lends some momentum to the voices in my head that I have to fight that are not true, that are not reality, right? That continue to remind me that, it's just, it's all about you. No, you can't depend on anyone. You don't need anyone. You can't look what happens when you depend on someone, right? And then it reinforces because it becomes a, what's that called? Self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because then you push people away to the point where they won't fulfill your needs. And see, they can't meet my needs anyway. So I will say personally, that's a hard one.
So the dysfunction is being needless or anti-dependent. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying all these are perspectives. Some people are so dependent. You're like, you need to kind of think for yourself, and that can be.
But I would say, in terms of, I would venture to say, here's an off-the-cuff idea, and maybe I don't know what you think about this, but for anyone who's risen to like a CEO, C-suite level, likely you're somewhat in this category of being anti-needy, right? Because if you're super needy, you're very codependent, and you're likely not going to be listening to this podcast. Or even, right? It's possible, but unlikely. I would venture to say an interesting team building exercise would be for folks to come up with a list of professional and personal needs that they, even if they could meet on their own or they could purchase on their own, because a lot of times you can buy your way out of needs pretty easily, right? Yeah, I just put it into Starbucks, my Starbucks app, and they meet my needs. I don't have to ask anybody for anything. It'd be really interesting to see if you could actually go to the extent of having your executive team share one personal and professional need and have them all try to meet that for each other, right?
Absolutely.
Lay yourself out there. Be a little needy to the point of actually letting someone else for free for the purposes of just meeting your needs. Go help you do it. Even if you could hire someone to do it.
Well, and that, doing that.
Come mow my yard. Whatever.
Rolls perfectly into the last and fifth dysfunction, which is someone who is too much in control. Because you're and the problem with being too much in control from a business owner's point of view is it doesn't scale.
Yeah.
So if you tell me I'm going to be an independent contractor and I'm only going to do small handyman things, you don't necessarily have to address things. But the point you want to scale a company and have more than 5, 10, 15, maybe 20 employees, and you have to be able to scale. Well, if you have to be in control over every single thing, it won't scale.
Yeah.
So people can't be too much in control because we also only have so much time.
Right. Yeah. No, and that's where, and that's also where, technology comes into play. But even with technology, you've got to learn to find ways to depend on other people, right? Because eventually you can't sell the product and build the product and test the product and manage the customers, and there are not enough skills in one person in this world to have a one-person business is doing all of those things, right? You have to. And
then by being so in control, we actually prohibit those we're working with growing as well too.
To be successful.
And that's what and if we're going to be a great scalable business, we have to invest in others and let them fail. I'm not going to say to my kid, oh, you didn't do this perfect. My son's only 10 years old. Of course he's not going to do it perfect.
Right.
I'll settle with most of the dishes being clean.
Yeah,
he messed up on 2 of them. That's fine. We'll work on that the next time we do dishes.
Right.
And I use that as a little kid problem, but we do the same thing with our company. Most orders are correct. Got to scale it and protect your company. So if we don't have enough in control, if we always have to be in control, that is a huge dysfunction that will hurt us long time.
Yep, absolutely.
So, the 5 things, superiority, being too invulnerable, being too good, perfectionism, being too needless, anti-dependent, or being too in control. In other words, problems don't scale. That can thoroughly take out our businesses, take out our life, or whatever it is we're trying to do, because we're meant to do life in community.
Yep. And just a little preview of next week, then we're going to look at the flip side of all 5 of those, right?
How do we fix it?
We're going to look at I don't think we're going to get into fixing next week. We're going to look at the traits, right? The traits that
5 traits to save your team.
Save the team, And then after that, the ingredients, correct?
Absolutely. Because each one of these, there's a polar opposite, and there is no perfection. What I use in my coaching is if I can be in the healthy traits with my team, even 65% of the time, that is good enough. No one hits 100% back to perfectionism. But if we can hit 65% in the right traits, that is golden. Yeah,
these are all these are on a gradient. All of these, right? These are sort of moving from really dysfunctional to overly dysfunctional, and we're shooting for somewhere in the middle.
Absolutely. Right. So next week, 5 traits to save your team. In the meantime, feel free to reach out to us at theconsultantthecoach.com. We'd love to help your team, and until then,
sounds good. Take care, everybody.
Okay, thanks, guys.